Hello and welcome to It's All About You, the best show about you on the internet. I am B. Dave Walters, writer, life coach, talk radio host. This is episode number 87. Let's call it Spiritual Racism, or Racism and the Law of Attraction. And you might be thinking these two things have nothing to do with each other, and until recently I didn't really think of the connection between them either. But I had someone submit a question to me and expressly ask me, how do you go about applying the law of attraction to dealing with what is happening in Ferguson, was their question, but by extension everything that is happening in New York and some of the protests that are happening all over the world. So normally, I don't weigh in on stuff like this. I figure for the most part, life is heavy enough that you and I don't really have to talk about some of these things, because I prefer for this to be a time where, yes, I can say some things that you might not want to hear, that nobody else is going to tell you, but that by the end of these talks, you're going to go out into the world and you're going to feel better. You're going to feel stronger, like you're going to be better and able to be, do, or have whatever it is that you want. So that is usually why I don't bring up this stuff. But now, between the fact that somebody asked me directly and some of the things that I'm seeing and hearing people say, I realize I have to speak up about this. So let me lay a couple things on you. Now, before we go too far, you might notice from my gorgeous caramel complexion that I am in fact a black male. And I'm a giant black male. I'm like 6'9", which is 2.05 meters. I'm like around 270, which is like 120 kilos. So I'm a pretty good sized guy. And being a big black guy in America is only about 2 steps short of being like a big black bear in America. And even though you probably can't tell because my accent doesn't come out too often, only when I'm really excited, I guess, I am from Little Rock, Arkansas. So I am from the South. I'm from the proper South. So the things that I'm talking to you about now, I'm talking to you with some authority about, okay? Now, first and foremost, I want to say something before we go too far. The police are human beings. And because they are human beings, like anything, there are good ones and there are bad ones. There are some who are bullies and there are some who are heroes. And even the good ones can still make mistakes. And so while I do think they need to be held accountable to a higher standard because they are enforcing the laws which theoretically are protecting all of us, they are still human beings. So remember that. You can't make any big sweeping statement about the police like it's all of them, because their husbands, their wives, their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, their grandfathers and grandmothers, sons and daughters. So just like there is a spectrum of humanity, there is a spectrum of law enforcement. That's the first thing. So always keep that in mind. Secondly, believe it or not, it is true that, like Dennis Leary said, racism is taught. We are not born hating. You know, he said, his exact quote was, I have a 2-year-old son and the things he hates are naps. You know, that's the end of the list. That's the only thing that he hates. Anything else you have to be indoctrinated about. And for the most part, that is true. But believe it or not, there actually is a certain biological reason why we notice when somebody's not like us. We don't necessarily have to immediately make a negative value judgment about that. But from an anthropological standpoint, we are hardwired to know who is and is not like us. And even intrinsically to feel a kinship with people who are like us. Because for the most part, through most of human history, you needed to know who was a member of your immediate clan or immediate extended family in order to live. Because if you just rolled up on the wrong person, that was a pretty easy way to get shanked. So we evolved to know from a ways off that it's like you and I are alike, you and I are not alike, and therefore I'm more wary of you because you and I are not alike. Okay? So the fact that you notice when there's a difference between you and someone else, that's not racism. That's just being human. That's just perception. That's how our brains are wired. Except when you pass some negative judgment about that, or you have some connection that follows along with that, or some loaded assumption or implication about who they are and what they are like because they look different than you, well, that's when you've crossed the line. And I have to say, I saw like some really, truly unfortunate things that some people have been saying. And you notice, again, I've told you before, we've talked about this, the internet is the closest thing we have to worldwide telepathy. Okay, when you truly find out what is going through somebody's head online. And I noticed there's been 2 big times that I've noticed latent racism coming out in people. One was when Obama won, especially the first time, both times, but especially when he won the first time. People that were just a little too upset that he won, just a little too mad, and he hadn't even taken office yet. And it was like, okay, wait a second, I understand that your team lost, but hang on, wait, what? Like, why are you so twisted up about this, right? Especially the people that when they're offering criticisms about the president, one of the first things they come up with are these derogatory adjectives about race. Always remember that. That's the first thing. Because it is very possible to disagree with the man and disagree with his politics without getting personal on that level, okay? The second time was Ferguson, when people that, again, were just a little too eager to support Darren Wilson and a little too eager to, like, donate money to his defense fund and all these other things. And I'm not saying whether or not you weighed the issue and decided that what he did was right and it was a justifiable use of force, because I got to tell you, I wasn't there. I don't know. Maybe he truly did feel like he was in fear for his life at that moment. And maybe he truly did feel like it was a justifiable use of force. What I know is there was a kid laying in the road with 8 bullets in them, and everything was kind of fishy. And my only stance on the issue is that it should have gone to a jury. It should have been put in front of a group of citizens that were able to take it all in, weigh it all, and make their decision. And that did not happen. And in that, I do believe it was a travesty of justice. At the end of the day, only Darren Wilson knows on the inside what truly happened and how he truly felt at that moment, at that time. Now we got this thing in New York where, again, outright, on film, lethal force applied. An illegal technique that was applied lethally. No repercussions. That one is much harder to justify because it was known the chokehold that he was applying was an illegal move and it was caught on camera. Now, I'm a huge advocate of putting cameras on cops for everybody's support. For everybody's protection, because I've seen, I was a bodyguard for a long time. I worked security, and I know how the stories change when people get busted. I know how the stories change when people sober up. And being a police officer is a very difficult, oftentimes thankless, and potentially very dangerous job. And it is necessary to have a record, even if sometimes that record doesn't necessarily lead to justice being done. At least if everything is being monitored, I think they are less likely to apply egregious use of force. And I also think people are less likely to do a lot of sassy, antagonizing type things to the police. Because here's a reality. Something I know growing up as a black male in America is don't antagonize the police. If I get stopped at a stoplight or if a cop approaches me about something, they get please, thank you, yes or no, sir. And that's for one very simple reason. This man or this woman has the ability to take my freedom or take my life. And I think that in and of itself gets a please and a thank you from me. Because I don't want to come across as threatening because, again, I'm a giant black dude. The thing about that, though, and what's kind of messed up and why that isn't right, is what people are saying. The only way to avoid these type of situations are not to get emotional or antagonistic in any way. Not violent, of course, never violent, but to not even get upset around the police. And that's the only way you can guarantee your personal safety. Well, then that's kind of living in a police state. And I mean it in the bad way. That you live in a militarized zone where it's like if you raise your voice, you're going to get murdered. That's not America anymore. That's not freedom. That's not liberty. And that's not right. Okay? I saw a very unfortunate thing. Again, many unfortunate things I've seen. But one of them was a list of white serial killers and all the number of people that they'd killed who'd been taken alive, and a list of black kids who'd never killed anybody and got shot. And the problem is, it is too easy to start to see people, quite frankly, like me. Usually when I open my mouth, I can talk my way out of things. But to see us first and foremost as a threat, first and foremost as a suspect, right? And not as a human being. And that isn't right. And when you find you're looking at other people, and if you see them first and foremost as this label, again, to a certain extent, some labeling is unavoidable. When information comes into our brains, we delete, distort, and generalize it. That's a byproduct of just how our brains function, okay? But if you cling too tightly to those labels, and if you cling too tightly to those negative judgments right out of the gates, then that's something that you kind of got to go to the mountaintop about and ask yourself about, okay? Now, I do think, in general, the good thing is that these things are dying away. We have a very digitally hyper interconnected world, and that level of taught ignorance cannot be maintained because the next generation are seeing people all the time who look different, who sound different, who come from different places and believe different things. And it's just unavoidable that they're just going to become innately accustomed to somebody who's different. And by that, we're growing closer and closer together. And things are improving. They really are improving. I'm just checking my time here. I mean, we got a black president, so that in and of itself is kind of a huge gain, right? But a couple things that I want to say, because I don't want this to go too terribly long. I told you I'm keeping these new ones shorter. And I do want to talk about how the law of attraction ties into this, but there's something that I need to say first, that I need to communicate. So I would ask that you all just give me a moment, because I need to talk to my fellow black brothers and sisters here for a second, so we can just kind of have a quick chat. Now, one thing I do want to say, my brothers and sisters, is if we are going to be offended by the implication that we are all criminals, and if we are going to be offended by the implication that we are not constructive members of society, then one of the things that we have to realize is we can no longer keep glorifying crime and keep glorifying being a criminal in our TV, in our film, and especially in our music, and then being surprised when people think that we are all acting like criminals. Does that make sense? Because if we're constantly talking about how great it is to be a criminal, and then people assume that we are criminals, we've kind of brought that upon ourselves. So we got to remember that. And I love rap, and I love Southern rap, and a lot of times I love like the just most ghetto stuff possible, like 3-6 Mafia and No Limit Soldiers and all that stuff. I love all that stuff, but it does not exist in a vacuum. You got to remember that. So if you are getting a certain response from people, and if you feel that you are getting a certain label unjustly, then you do have to stop and look at how are you carrying yourself? What are you saying? What are you projecting that is getting that response? Which brings us to how the law of attraction figures into all of this, okay? Remember, the measure of communication is in the result that it receives, okay? It is not what you are saying, it is what other people are hearing. So you do always have to be aware of what is it that you are putting out into the universe. Now, right after Ferguson, I did see a lot of these like, oh, love and light posts, and we don't need protests, we just need light and a higher vibration. Yeah, you know who people who say that? People who say that are people who have never been lined up on a sidewalk when they were 100% innocent. People who have never been stopped and frisked. Trust me, when you've lived it, the last thing you want to hear about is raising your vibration, okay? But there is some truth to that, because remember, what you are putting out is what you're going to get back. If you want to know how you can apply the law of attraction to changing situations like this, and the way you do that is by focusing on the positive, okay? Because no, we cannot let injustice go uncontested, but you don't have to cling to the bitterness of it and believe that the whole world is bad and that all police are bad or all of this minority or all black people or all Mexicans or all Asians or all anything or anything. Let all that go. Focus on the positive, okay? Because there is always, 100% of the time, more things to be grateful for than not. Because even though a lot of people are saying, oh, we live in this like totalitarian regime. No, people are getting to protest in the streets and not getting shot. That's pretty clear that we do not live in a totalitarian regime, that we can speak out, that we can be upset, that we can be outraged, that we have that right, and that we have the right to disagree over whether or not we should be upset and outraged. And that is all a part of it, and that is all important, okay? So focus on what you want to see manifest. Focus on the good. Focus on the positive stories that you hear of police that are helping people, of communities that are rallying together, of bridges being built between different types of people. And most importantly, be a bridge like that yourself. Be a light in the darkness yourself. You do something, even if it's just share a positive picture, share a positive story. Stop spreading more of the haterishness. Stop spreading more of the divisiveness. Check things to make sure that they are right before you say them. I can't tell you how many people I went around and just publicly busted, called out for posting these pictures of like looters and stuff that they were like, oh, the people in Ferguson, they're not even mad. They just want to steal things. Most of those pictures were from England in the Birmingham riots in 2011. And if you look closely, most of them are white people. And I'm not saying that there wasn't definitely scenes of people committing crimes in Ferguson, but as I called out directly, to use images that are out of context and inaccurate not only makes you ignorant, that also makes you lazy. So Google image search, it is your friend. Go to Google, type in Google image search, paste the URL of your picture, and just see where it comes from. See if it's real. You can't believe everything that you read on the internet, especially if it's from places that have a vested interest in spreading dissatisfaction and disdain and conflict in between us all. But I'm going to leave you with this thought, because again, I said I was going to wind this up and I'm going a little earlier. Sorry. The real enemy is not racism. The real enemy is classism. Classism. The war between the haves and the have-nots. And I got nothing against rich people. I'm a pretty big fan of money. I like money a lot. But I can tell you for sure, when I go to Beverly Hills, when I walk into Beverly Hills, I am treated like a king everywhere I go. Multi-million-dollar stores, they roll out the red carpet for me. Why? Because they don't know who I am. They don't know if I'm a basketball player. They don't know if I'm somebody important's son or husband, right? And just the fact that you are there, it's like just being there signs off on your right to be there. And it is a very interesting thing seeing how differently you get treated in different places. So that's a thing to think about, that the real division is between the haves and the have-nots in this country. And the best way that you can battle that is to turn yourself into a have and lift up as many people that you can in the process. Okay? Now, of course, people have been talking about this for centuries and that there's more that we can do, and I've already gone over, so I'm going to stop talking now because I can talk the rest of the night and not cover it all. But I do want you to know it is getting better. I'm telling you, as someone who has lived it, who has seen it change before my eyes, who I think back to just my parents. My parents had to go to colored-only restrooms and colored-only water fountains. And now we have a black president. We have black millionaires and billionaires and Latino billionaires. The richest man in the world's a billionaire. The richest man in the world's Latino. He's from Mexico. That's cool, okay? There's room for everybody. And I realize, by the way, that there's lots of different minorities. I tend to just refer to black people because that's kind of the limitations of my personal experience. It's not that I'm trying to exclude anybody else. I just want you to know that we're all in this together. Remember that we are all in this together. This is all of our country. This is all of our world. This is all of our future. Okay? So hold on to each other. You're great, and I love you. Okay, bye-bye.